guys hear me back there? This work? All right. As the diagram said, this is Differential Cryptanalysis for Dummies. Who am I? My name is John. I'm in the Navy, although I'm not speaking on behalf of the Navy. That's the disclaimer. This is all my own stuff. You'll probably find me in the Lockpick Village or running the tamper contest with the diagram. But if you want to get a hold of me, email or whatever, then theamazingking.com is where you should go. There's also a lot of crypto stuff on there, so if you want to learn more, then there's further materials. All right, what we're going over today is differential cryptanalysis. It's a specific technique that we use to attack modern ciphers. Pretty much all of modern cryptanalysis evolved from this basic attack. So if you can understand how this works, you can go further and learn the other attacks and really dig into crypto. I want to do this talk because there's a huge difference between when you go look up crypto and how to break it. You see classical cryptanalysis like attack at dawn. There's letters and like scrambling and stuff, and beyond there's that, and then there's like PhD math papers that you don't understand. There's nothing to bridge the gap. So that's what we're trying to do here. This talk is academic in nature, and what I mean by that is you are not going to walk away and go use this on a pen test, for example. We're going to build a scenario, and then we're going to break the cipher in the scenario. It's all done in code. All this stuff is public, so obviously there's no classified information, but you can go dig this stuff up yourself and get off the internet. We're going to stay away from math because there's already enough written in math talk. I'm going to try and dumb it down into my language. I went to algebra in high school. That's the extent of my formal math education. Right. All right, before we start talking about breaking ciphers, we have to define what is a break. What do we mean that we broke a cipher? To do it by brute force means that you're testing every single possible key. The analogy is you're testing every single combo on a safe dial. And when you perform a break, when you break crypto, you're trying to find the key in less computational effort than exhaustive search. So you don't want to test every single key. You want to get it in less work. So again, the analogy with the safe lock, you can either test 1 million combos, or you can take apart the lock, figure out how it works, find the vulnerability, and do 150 combos. You're still doing work. It's not instant, but you're doing less work. And in the case of DES, it goes from 2.3 years to 1.6 days if you apply this attack to that algorithm. Right. We're not attacking DES. There's been all sorts of stuff written about DES and how to break it and how it works. We're going to go after something even easier. It's called FEAL, Fast Data Encipherment Algorithm. It's pretty old. I mean, it's from the 80s. It was made as a replacement for DES to run on less powerful hardware. But it employs the same design principles that DES does in other modern block ciphers. So it's a really, really good case study. It's also vulnerable to everything. Like whenever a crypto guy finds a new attack, he wants to try it out, but he doesn't have a cipher in mind, they inevitably go after FEAL because they know it's going to break. It's like the redheaded stepchild of the crypto world. You don't have to worry about these specifics. They're just up there for reference. All right, like I said, we're building a virtual system, and then we're going to break it. In this one, we have a sender and a receiver. The sender's on the left, the receiver's on the right. They're going to send plain text in 64-bit blocks to the receiver. They send it through this encrypt function. That's where FEAL4 lives, is in that box. Turns in ciphertext. The guy on the other end decrypts it and gets the original plain text back. This is a symmetric algorithm, which means that both the sender and the receiver are using the same key material to do this. The way that's supposed to be handled is FEAL4 has a separate algorithm called a key schedule. You feed in 64 bits for your key, and it spits out 6 32-bit subkeys, they're called. So it expands that and gives you more key material to work with. For what we're doing here, we don't even care about the key schedule. If you look at the way this diagram is done, if you can get the subkeys, then you're able to decrypt the communications. Does that make sense? You don't need the original key. Who cares? The only thing you need is the subkeys. And it turns out 632-bit subkeys is actually harder than doing one 64-bit key, which should make sense. But to do the basic versions to attack, it makes more sense to simplify it down. All right, the way we're going to do this, we're going to use, it's called differential cryptanalysis is a chosen plaintext attack. When you think about breaking crypto, a lot of people imagine, okay, I'm going to capture the ciphertext, and just using that, I'm going to get the key. And that is one way to do it, but that assumes a weak attacker. In the academic world, they allow for stronger attack models. And this one is chosen plaintext. The idea is that we have an adversary, right? Say it's, I don't know, China, North Korea, Russia, NSA, pick one. I don't care. They're using that crypto system right there. We want to get the key, so we break into their facility, we steal the encryption device, and we get to hold it for, I don't know, say a day before they realize it's gone, or it might be 10 minutes. But the point is that we have captured this encryption device, and we want to figure out what the keys are that are stored inside of it. They load the keys in, and you can't get them out. It's like, the idea is that it's a tamper-proof box, which if you're doing the tamper contest should be a little funny. So what we can do is we can choose some plaintext, send it into the box, and we get the resulting ciphertext out. And by doing that over and over again in a deliberate way, we can get the subkeys, and we can go break the code being used in the real world. Yeah, the 3D box, that makes everything easier to understand. That's why I used it. This is the overview of how the attack works. Don't worry if you don't understand it right now, but this is to give you a context, because we're about to dig way deep into the nuts and bolts and the guts of this stuff. This is just the overview. We're going to choose some plaintext that has a particular trait called a differential. We're going to send it into the box. We're going to get the resulting ciphertext out at the bottom. We're going to partially decrypt it while guessing the last subkey. And we're going to get a resulting text, and we're going to see if it matches a predicted output differential. As I said, we'll revisit this in a minute, and it might make more sense, but that's the idea of what we're doing, zoomed out. Or another way to look at it with pretty 3D boxes can make everything easier. Like I said, we choose plaintext with that differential, we throw them into this box that we stole, and then we send it into our round 4 decryption device, we guess a subkey, and then we verify that the output differential we get matches what we predicted. All right, this is getting a little more in depth about what I mean by this stuff. Differentials are, if you have two numbers, in this case x0 and x1, the differential, or delta x, of those two numbers that come in pairs is x0 XOR with x1. XOR, XOR, exclusive OR. It's a mathematical operation. How many people are familiar with XOR? Have you used it in code? Awesome. All right, then the thing on the left should make sense. Delta x has ones in the positions where the bits changed between x0 and x1. So what we do is we choose plaintexts such that they satisfy this differential. They have this property. So we pick a random number, we XOR it with an input differential. We don't know what that is yet. We'll go into how you find that. But we XOR it with this input differential, and we get the second half of the pair. And then we send both of them into the encryption device. On the other end, we have reading differentials. So we've injected them so far. Now when we get two numbers out, we just XOR them together and we get the differential. And this is what we see if it matches the prediction. Speaking of predicting differentials, whenever you send numbers through a function, through a block that does some transformation to them, parts of a cipher in this case, you send both of these numbers, x0 and x1, through the function. You XOR them at the beginning, and you see what the input differential is. And the properties of that function, if it's weak, if it's not cryptographically secure, you can predict what the output differential is going to be. You don't care about the numbers themselves. All you care about is this property. So as these numbers travel through the cipher, out there in space is this differential traveling with them, is how I think about it. It's just the property of these two numbers that are in a pair. So in this case, we have a two-round differential characteristic. If we inject two numbers that have a differential of 3, when it gets past that first function, the differential will be a 9. We don't know what the numbers are, but we know what the differential is. Then it goes through the function again, and it gives us a differential of 2. This is just an example. So again, now that we kind of have a little bit of context about what this means, we're going to inject numbers in pairs. We're going to inject blocks in pairs that have this input differential. It goes through the first 3 rounds, and it gives us, it should be the predicted output differential, whatever number that happens to be. We get the resulting ciphertext. We decrypt it, but not all the way. We decrypt it based on a guess that we make at the last round subkey. And we get a pair of numbers, we get their differential, we read it, and we see if it matches the prediction. If it does, then the subkey we use to make that guess, it gets a point. Its score goes up. If you do this over and over again, the correct subkey will emerge. All right, now we're going to dig way down and see how we build this prediction. I keep talking about, we inject differentials, then we predict what it's going to be. But how do you do that? This is kind of the puzzly aspect of breaking crypto. At the lowest level, this cipher operates using, they call it the G-box in the specifications. What it is, it's a function that has 2 inputs. They're both 8 bits. There are 2 types of G-boxes, 2 flavors. There's G0 and G1. The only difference is that X on the left of that square is addition, by the way. This is how cryptographers write this stuff. So the first thing that happens, if this is a G0 box, for instance, the input 1 comes in, input 2 comes in, they get added together, and then 0 gets added to it, so no effect. So this is just regular addition, but it's bound to 8 bits. So if the carries make it go into 9 bits, it just drops them off. It just truncates it. After that, it goes into bitwise rotation. It's very important that you realize this is bitwise rotation and not shifting. Otherwise, your code will not work. All it does is rotate, in this case, 2 bits to the left, or 2 bits toward the most significant bit. And then it spits out an 8-bit output. And if it was G1, it'd be the exact same thing, but that X would be a 1, and you'd add that to it. Is everybody good with the G-box? Just an idea of how it works. Because we're about to break it. It's interesting to know, this is the only source of what's called nonlinearity. This is like their defense against cryptanalysis, is this stupid box. And this is how you beat it. This is how you predict a differential going through it, which is what we're trying to do. We're building a chain of predictions that we can turn into a full attack. I saw that addition and that bitwise rotation. I'm like, I don't want to sit here and actually analyze how this works and like what differences would matter. So I just brute forced it. I tried every possible pair of input 1s, so every possible pair of numbers that can go into input 1, every possible pair of inputs that can go into input 2, and then I tried X, X being 0 or 1. So a G0 box and a G1 box. I tried it on both. And that I just recorded, like what's the differential on input 1, what's the differential on input 2, and what's the resulting output differential. What happens when you XOR the results together at the end? What do you get? And there were 2 properties that held through, 2 differential characteristics that always hold through this G-box. The first one, it's a fairly obvious one. It happens with every function, every deterministic function. If you have an input differential of 0, you're going to get an output differential of 0. The reason why that is because you're not making any changes. The first half of that pair that you feed it is some numbers, and the second half is the exact same numbers. So you're going to get identical outputs out. So that is why any 0 input differential is going to give you a 0 output differential. The second one is the good one, the one we're after. These are in hex. I'm sure you guys figured that out. Either input 1 or input 2 can be 80. If the other input is 0, then we get this output differential of 2. The reason why that is, when you do the addition, if you do that addition and you change a bit anywhere in the middle of the byte, then there could be a carry, and it's going to screw up other bits. But if you do it in the most significant bit of that byte, if there's a carry, it just gets chopped off. And then it gets rotated by 2 bits, and the difference turns into a 2. But I didn't figure that out at first. I just brute forced it and got the result and then figured it out later. All right, so that's the takeaway from this slide, is that those are the 2 characteristics of this block, of this G-box. The reason we have to learn how the G-box works is because it's used in the F-box. This looks scary, I promise it's not. We can use what we just learned to beat this thing and predict differentials going through it. All right, the first differential you can have through this, the characteristic is if you feed it an input differential of 0, you're going to get an output differential of 0 because nothing changed. However, we can use those G-box differentials we found, the 80 to the 2, and we can build another one through this, another differential through the F-box. Look in the top left. Let me get a cursor here. You see that thing? All right. We have this byte is 80, this byte is 80. If these little circles with the pluses in them are XOR. Remember, I'm sure you guys know that if you XOR the same number with itself, you get 0 out. That also works with differentials. These are not numbers being fed into this box. These are differentials of pairs of numbers that we're tracking. And one of the properties of XOR is that if you feed it this, 2 differentials that are the same, you get 0 out. So that's where that 0 comes from. That goes into the G1 right there. On the right side, we have 0 and 0 for these 2 bytes. They get XORed, become 0. And you can see that the zeros just keep zeroing out. But the tricky part's over here. 80 with 0 uses that differential we found earlier. 80 with 0 into a G-box gives us 2 for the output differential. And this characteristic is enough to break the cipher. And we're going to show how we do that right now. All right, you'll notice we haven't talked about keys anywhere. We've been seeing these functions that just move bits around. We haven't talked about how the subkeys get mixed in. Where's the security? The way that it works is that the keys, this is almost universal for block ciphers, the key gets XORed in somewhere. And it's the same in feel. So we have an input differential of 80-80. This is the one we found right there. If you look at the top, 80, 80, 0, 0. It comes into the XOR. This K3 is a subkey. It's one of those 6 32-bit subkeys that we found that we were talking about earlier. Keys are interesting because they have a differential of 0. When you have these pairs of plaintext that you're encrypting, and they carry a differential, the relationship between them as they go through the cipher, the keys don't change. So if I send this one bit of plaintext through, I encrypt it, then I send the next bit of plaintext through and I encrypt it. The keys didn't change between those 2 operations. And because the keys didn't change, then keys have an input differential of 0. So that goes into the XOR. The 80-80 XOR with 0 gives us 80-80. It goes to the F box, and it gives us the output differential of 2. That's the whole thing. So again, the way we do this is we inject an input differential at the beginning, and we predict it at the input to the last round. And this is how the whole thing flows. At the beginning, we just send in 80-80 and 80-80. The first 2 subkeys mix in with zeros, but it doesn't affect it because the differentials are zeros. So it just goes straight through. These two differentials get XORed together, produces a 0, comes through here, and at the output we end up with 0 on the left and 80/80 on the right. This little bit up here on the right is our, think of like your toolbox. It's what you can use to build this path. These are the options you have available to you for going through the F-box. So in the first round, we just do 0 to 0. On round 2, we have 0 on the left, 80/80 on the right. Again, the subkeys don't matter. They carry they carry a differential of 0. So we get 80/80 going into the F-box. Remember, this differential characteristic up here, 80/80, always turns into the 0 to however many zeros that is. So that's what we get out of the F-box. And it carries down, crosses over, and we end up with 88 on the left and 2 on the right. And this is where it gets kind of weird. This is the round 3. We have this 80/80, it hits the XOR, but on the right we have this differential of 2. It gets XORed with 0 from the subkey. So it's still 2 going into the round function. We don't have a prediction for if we give the F-box a differential of 2. All we can predict is 80/80 going to 2 and 0 going to 0. We don't know what the differential is going to be coming out of this F-box. And that's fine. So we have unknown, unknown, but on the left, this 2 just carried over. And that's what we're going to use. That's the final prediction that we're looking for. All right, so we have, when we inject that original differential of 80/80, 80/80, the end result of all this diagram tracing is that we end up with this output differential of 2, no matter what. The subkeys don't affect it. Nothing can change this. This is a property of the cipher because it's weak. We end up with this 2 coming into the input to the last round. On the right, we don't know what the differential is, but we don't care. All right, we get the ciphertext out of the box that we stole. We can just trace back with the numbers themselves, the actual pair of numbers we get out the end. And we calculate until we get to Z. On the way, we guess this subkey, this K3. You can start at 0 and see if this works out. Then you go to 1, 2, 3, 4. You just try them all. You send the result through the F-box into this XOR. You XOR it with the left side of the ciphertext, and you get Z. Z is this pair of numbers you've been tracing through. You calculate their difference. You just XOR them together. If that delta Z is equal to the 2, then there's a good chance that K3 you guessed was correct. And there's a little pseudocode on the right. All right, this is, again, a little bit more of a zoomed out view. So we choose that plain text with those differentials I just showed, 80/80 and 80/80. It goes through the first 3 rounds. And because of the properties of the cipher, the vulnerability, we can predict that it's going to be 2 at the end of round 3. So we take the ciphertext, we partially decrypt it while guessing the key that goes into this round 4. And we see if it matches when we XOR the 2 numbers together, the pair. We see if it matches that 2. If it does, the key's probably right. So that's how you break the last round. If you can write some code and make that work, you're almost done. You've broken the cipher. You win. But if you want to do the whole thing and get the whole key out, you got to do a little bit more. But it's the same idea. You start with, you have to calculate a new differential because you want it to fall apart at the input to the last round that you haven't cracked yet. You don't want to predict differentials in the ciphertext. You want it to go random at the last minute because that makes the process of guessing keys and testing them more randomized, which is what you want. So what we do is, we already cracked round 4. We've guessed these subkeys. We've checked for the differential, If it's right, we give that key a +1 until we get it. So now we have the last round subkey. So we just decrypt it, and then we repeat the same process round 3. We predict a differential that goes from the chosen plaintext through rounds 1 and 2 and into the input of round 3 this time. We guess the subkey there, and we see if it matches. If it does, then that's round 3 subkey is probably correct. We repeat until we get it. Round 2, we do the exact same thing. You have to use, if you look at the differentials that go through here, 80, 80, 80, 80 goes to 2. Notice we use 0, 80, 80 goes to 2. We have to modify our approach so that this differential prediction falls apart at the end. And then for round 2, it's a little bit different, but same idea. Getting round 1 is tough. It's more straightforward. All you have to do is take guesses at K0 and calculate K4 and K5. Because you chose the plaintext, you have that data. You can use it to get these numbers. But if you get enough K0, K4, and K5 that agree with each other, then they're correct. I keep saying, we're choosing pairs of plaintext, and then we're guessing keys. How much data are we actually talking about to get a good subkey emerging that we can actually crack the cipher? I did 100 iterations of this per number of chosen plaintext pairs. So if you just feed it one pair of plaintext and try and get the key, it's not going to work. It's 0%. But as you add more, it goes up, and right around the 12 or 13 pairs mark, you get 100% success. There's always a very remote possibility that it won't work, though, which is what the demo is probably going to expose. To give an idea of scale, if you were to do this brute force, this 192-bit key or 6 32-bit subkeys, that's how long it would take you. That's a lot. But if you do it with the attack, this takes a minute, but it's not that long.
So you just did a bunch of print statements, and like you cracked the shit?
That's right. Look at that, 15 seconds. All right, what it's done is it's using 12 chosen plaintext pairs with that input differential of 80, 80, 80, 80. It's predicting an output differential of 2 going into the input of the last round. And then it's testing subkeys and seeing if they match that predicted output differential. And then it goes to round 3. It decrypts using what it's found so far. And then it repeats the process for the input to round 3. Now it's getting the last little bits of the key. Look at that. All right, so it found it. Good work, software. Yay! But so 58 seconds is pretty good compared to, that. All right. That is the basics of how it works. I know I sped through it, but if you guys when we do the Q&A, we're going to be able to figure out what didn't make sense in my rambling and hopefully build understanding. All right. Does anybody have questions? What's up?
If the cipher had more rounds, would that frustrate this attack?
If a cipher had more rounds, would that frustrate the attack? It would, because, let's see, what's a good slide for that? Yeah. So if we just tacked on more rounds, what would happen is that we would have to find a differential, a path through that cipher that we could keep predicting until we got to the end of it. If we can't find one of those, then we're screwed. In this case, you can't go past feel 4. You can't go past 4 rounds with 100% probability. In this case, that characteristic, that 80-80 goes to 2 thing, That happens every single time, 100%. There's no probability involved. With other differential attacks, like the ones on DES, instead of being a 100% chance that that characteristic is going to happen, it's a probability. It's a chance. And if that chance is higher than what you would normally predict, then you can use that. But it takes a lot more data. That whole feeding 12 pairs into it and getting that to work wouldn't happen. It's like, you have to feed it tens of thousands of plain texts to get it to converge on a correct key. However, adding more rounds doesn't always work. I've got a thing for that. There is an attack called a slide attack. This is kind of one of the concepts that was floating around. If we just add more rounds, then it makes the cipher secure, no matter how shitty the rounds are. It turns out you can't do that. With the slide attack, what you're looking for is two sets of plain text and ciphertexts that have gone through the cipher and just had this happen, such that P1 is the output of round 1 for P0. And the way you can find this is you examine every pair of ciphertexts and you use the corresponding C0 and you use them together to get a round key, to get the sub key right here. It's really easy to break one round if you have the plain text and you have the ciphertext. It's a lot easier to do that, especially if the round's weak. And when you get a key out there, you encrypt P0 with that key for one round and see if it matches P1. If it did, then you have a slid pair and you know the key. The key is right. I have an example on the website. I have a cipher with 100 rounds just stacked back to back, and this thing beats it in less than a second. So adding more rounds is not always the answer, but it helps, especially if it's a good cipher. All right, what else you got? Oh.
How does this compare to cracking WEP?
Compared to cracking WEP. WEP is a stream cipher, and I don't know much about it, to be honest. Right, what else we got here? All right, anybody have some more questions? That or Gam, you good? Okay, just checking. All right, let's see. Okay, on the opposite end of the spectrum, instead of using differentials that we know happen 100% of the time, you can use differentials that you know happen 0% of the time. In other words, if I change the last bit of a pair when I feed it in, I start with a number, I feed it in, I start with that same number, I change one bit, and I feed it in again, and I see what changes at the end. Sometimes you can get characteristics where this differential change will never happen. There's a 0% chance. You can use that the same way we did before. You partially decrypt through the last round while guessing the subkey, and if you get that differential that's supposed to happen, it's supposed to never happen, then you know that key is no good, and you can throw it away, and you can narrow it down like that. Back up a little bit. Yeah, we'll do linear. Why not? All right, like I said, differential cryptanalysis is kind of the building blocks they use to build other attacks. Pretty much, if you read about this stuff, every other attack is written about in the context of differential cryptanalysis. One of these is linear. It's linear attacks. It's very, very similar, but instead of using differentials, instead of taking a pair of numbers and XORing it together and then tracking how that result changes, we track bit parity. So if we have a linear characteristic like the one in the middle with this binary here, what that means is that if we send a plain text in and bits 7, 4, and 3, if they XOR together to get some 1-bit result, it means that the output, if you XOR bits 5, 3, and 0, they're going to be the same or they're going to be different. But the chances of that happening are skewed. That's supposed to happen 50% of the time, no more, no less. If it's any different than that, then you can do that prediction. You can decrypt through the last round while guessing that subkey and see if it matches your prediction. That's how linear cryptanalysis is. It's kind of the foundation of how that works. If you want to learn more about this stuff, all the papers out there are written by math geeks, and I don't understand them because I don't speak math. But there's a couple exceptions. One of them, there's a book called Modern Cryptanalysis. Guys, I think this guy's name is Christopher Swenson is the author. It's a phenomenal book. He goes into this exact same kind of stuff, but you can read about it more deliberately and work through it. I really recommend that you guys write code if you want to get into this stuff. If you just try and work it out on paper and like, okay, that kind of makes sense, it's not going to work. I had to write proof of concept code to get it. And then after you do that, to test it against brute force and make sure you're actually beating it with less work. For tips on that, make sure you test all of your functions. So, for instance, that bitwise rotation, C does not have a bitwise rotation operator. It has shift, but you can't just rotate it unless you use assembly inline. So you have to write a function to rotate bits, which sounds easy, and it is. But if you get it wrong, and then you work for another week trying to figure out why your cryptanalysis doesn't work, and it turns out it's that, you'll be mad. When you write your encrypt functions, make sure that you check, you decrypt it again and make sure it comes back as the same thing. But let's see. Okay, here's another one. We talked about differentials, right? When you take these two numbers, you XOR them together, and you have this differential that goes through the cipher and changes. Another way you can modify this is to use, they're called truncated differentials. Instead of looking for exact numbers with this XOR value, instead of predicting that, if I send two numbers in that XOR together to be 7, then I predict that the two numbers out are going to XOR to be 3. Instead of doing that, you predict bits in that differential. So if I send in two numbers that do not have a difference in this bit, the 7th bit, but they do have a difference in this bit, and they don't have a difference in this bit, I don't care about the rest of them. They can be anything. Then I'm able to predict that the output will at least change this bit 0 over here. These happen a lot more often because you're not looking for specific differences. You're looking for partial differences. All right. Let's see what we got. Boomerangs are hard. Let's skip that. Go back. All right, anybody have any questions? If not, come find me. And if you want to sit down and talk about this stuff, we can draw diagrams and hopefully my rambling will make more sense. Give me when I'm drunk, it helps. Let's see what time we got. Man, that's quick. That was like half an hour. That's good. Well, screw it. Talk's over. We're done.